Great. All right. So, little bit introduction about myself. So, this is Dixon. I've been working in healthcare industry for the past 13 plus years. So, I have led many projects with respect to Hl7 data integrations, various data standards within Hl7. So, I worked as architect. I led a team, led many different teams of different interface implementations. So I have also worked on Hl7 CCDs, Fire, all the IHE standards and all. Worked with various integration engines like Mirth Connect, Rhapsody, Integration Buddy, Connector, Ensemble. There are many other interface engines out there like CorePoint, Cloverleaf. But I did not get a chance to work on them, but more or less worked on most of the integration engines out there in the market. And I've been training resources from the past 8 years, worked both online and offline. So pretty much been in data integration space from through my entire career, right from the beginning, except for the first 1 year. So that's all about myself. We'll go ahead and get started. Let's see what we are going to take a look at today. So to just line out the course, first we'll start with Hl7 intro to see what is Hl7, how did it start, why did it start, what are the reasons behind the scenes, and when exactly did it start. And then we'll jump into looking at message structure to understand how to read an Hl7 message, what is the basic layout of that particular message structure, so that we know how to deal with the various message types which we are going to look in the future sessions. So once we understand about Hl7 message structure, then we will jump into understanding what are the different message types that we have as part of our healthcare industry. So there are there are actually many message types and many different event types. We'll see few of them that are most important and most frequently seen in today's world. Okay. Then once we look at the message types, we are going to have a deep understanding of each message structure to see what are the segments that are involved, what are the events that we usually encounter or we usually come across. And we'll also talk about message structure for each of those events. And we'll see what are the fields, data fields or data elements that are involved, and understand the functional reason behind those events. So understanding just the structure is not enough. Understanding the functional aspect of each of those fields is also important, which will help us to remember the field names, field numbers, and which will also help us to understand more about various message structure and its relevant use in the real-time events. Okay, then once we do that, we will jump into understanding data types of Hl7. We'll have a deep understanding of data types. There are 90 data types in Hl7 version 2.8. We will go ahead and take a look at least 30-35 of them so that we can get a good grip of what data types are, how they are formulated. And usually data types are called as the backbone. We'll see why they are called as backbone and all. And by that time, we'll complete understanding about Hl7 and the various message structures, and how can you write an Hl7 message if you want to, or how can you go ahead and understand or read an Hl7 message if you want to, will be done by then. Next, we will jump into networking sessions. Hl7 messaging comes into play whenever you have to transact some data between two different systems, right? So as it involves two different systems exchanging the data, understanding the networking aspect of it is very important. So we'll be going through networking session. We'll see what are the various connection methodologies that we have to go ahead and transact the data from one system to another. So we'll take a look at them, and we'll also take a look at few troubleshooting steps that we should know being interface developer, right? And then once networking is done, we'll jump into Mirth Connect. We'll see an application workflow to understand what is Mirth Connect. We'll understand about interfaces. We will go ahead and start building interfaces in terms of various connection models. So in networking session, we are going to take a look at 4 or 5 different types of connection models and their working methodologies. The same thing will replicate here and try to build them real time in Mirth Connect. We'll see what are the various types of interfaces we are going to build, like folder to folder connectivity, TCP/IP connectivity, database connectivity, and all. And then once we know how to deal with these connection models, next we will take a look at how do we develop an interface right from scratch. When I say scratch, we'll see how to extract raw data from database and construct an HL7 message out of it, and using Mirth Connect. So we'll see the step-by-step process, how we can achieve it. And we'll also see the other way around, which is to interpret an HL7 message and write it to the database. How are we going to do that? So we'll take a look at that process, and we will develop 2 channels for achieving these 2 things. And during this process itself, during the building of interfaces using the database data that we have, we'll get introduced to E4X, which is a technology that is used to go ahead and build interfaces in Mirth Connect. We'll also get introduced to JavaScript. So I'll be covering very basics of JavaScript, which is needed for Mirth Connect. JavaScript is huge, but we won't be covering everything. So I just wanted to set right expectation that we won't be getting into app development or anything as such. We'll take a look at the topics in JavaScripting that are needed for Mirth Connect. That is all. So we'll take a look at that, and then we will apply that knowledge to go ahead and start building the channels on Mirth Connect. Okay. And once we do that, we will take a look at other additional features of Mirth Connect, like alerts, various, how do you capture the events and all. And with that, we'll complete our Mirth Connect training. So after completing the training, you will have a very good knowledge on how do we develop an interface right from zero to a complete project, and build a complete project. Then once that is done, we'll take a look at what is the um, uh, certification aspect. How do you get certified? What are the topics that you have to go through? And what are the important topics that you have to touch base and all. So I'll take 1 or 2 sessions on certification, and we'll share sample questions with you so that you can go through and prepare for your certification as well. Right? Any questions? All right, I'm not hearing anything. So let us go ahead and get started with today's session. So by the end of today's session, we'll get to know where do we hear this term, which is Hl7, and what is the hospital workflow? What is Hl7? Why do we have Hl7? How did we end up in having this name? And we'll also get introduced to the term interface. We'll understand what is it interface and what is the role of Hl7 in terms of interface. We'll take a look at what is interoperability and Hl7 message structure. So before jumping into the sessions, there are a few terms that we need to be aware of in order to go ahead and understand these jargons all through our training. So we'll be using these jargons a lot. So I just wanted to introduce you guys to these terms if you're not from healthcare background. PME is practice management software application, which is basically used by the front-end staff like receptionist in the hospital to register patient records, maintain their billing and all. So that's a software application. Similarly, we have another application called EHR, which is electronic health record. And this is the application which resides at doctor's desk. So all the doctors will have access to this application to manage the clinical data of patient. So the entire clinical data is present in EHR, and all the administrative data of the patient is present in the PM system. Next, we have HIS, which is Hospital Information System. or you can call as HIMS or HMIS, Hospital Management Information System, Hospital Information Management System. So they call it with various names. Okay, so we have this HIS, which is a combined module of both PM and EHR. Okay, so we will go ahead and take a look at what is HIS later, but it is just a combined module and how that is used. We'll talk about that in the upcoming sessions. And then we have LIS, which is Lab Information System. So Lab Information System is kind of an application which is used by the laboratory people to manage orders, to manage the results, and all of these things by the lab. Then we have few terminologies. One is ICD, which is International Classification of Diseases. Basically, this is a book of diseases. I mean, listed out with all the diseases, and each disease has a unique code. So that's what ICD is all about. CPT is also very similar to ICD, but in CPT you have a list of codes representing what is the procedure that is being performed on the patient after diagnosing something. Then you have CCD, HIE, and IHE. These three terms are interrelated with each other. Apparently, CCD is a document that is shared by different hospitals regarding one specific encounter or appointment. Let's say you are visiting hospital today and got admitted, and you were there in the hospital for 3 days. So what happened during 3 days is uh, documented in the form of a CCD document, and that can be shared with other entities if needed. So that's what CCDs are all about. So we'll talk a little bit about CCDs, HIEs, and IHE in the last sessions, in the last 2-3 sessions when we talk about certification and all. Once we complete Mirth Correct, the reason why I'm introducing you to CCDs, healthcare data standards are not just HL7. So HL7 is basically an organization. Apart from version 2, which we most famously know as HL7, there are other healthcare data standards as well, like X12, CCDs, FHIR, IHE. So we'll have a small introduction to each of these, so that you can be aware of that, aware of the fact that there are other standards as well. Um, but major space is being covered with the help of with HL7 V2. So we'll take a look at that. So let us quickly go ahead and take a look at the hospital workflow. Most of us are experienced and should be aware of it. Um, but this hospital workflow will act as a blueprint for us down the line. We'll be looking back at this workflow many a times to understand how things work from HL7 perspective, HL7 version 2 perspective. So when a patient visits the hospital, we know that he will visit the receptionist desk. Receptionist will immediately ask whether you are here for the first time or have you been to the hospital earlier. Receptionist would the patient might say accordingly. If he was there before, then he will say that I have been there. If he is not there, then receptionist will go ahead and give a form to for them to fill out all of the details, right? So they will fill out the entire details, and once that is done, um, the receptionist will enter the every detail of their into the system, and this information is called as demographic information. Okay. Once a demographic information is captured, the receptionist will again ask the patient, who do you want to meet? Patient will provide the doctor's name, and an appointment will be created in the PM system. And this information will be sent over to the EHR system. How it is sent and all, we'll take a look at that later. But just assume that the data is being sent from PM to EHR for now. So once the data is in the EHR system, doctor will go ahead and analyze the patient, diagnose the patient, try to figure out what happened to the patient with the help of symptoms and all. If he is able to, well and good. If he is not, then he will place an order and say that go ahead and get these tests done and let me know once they are done. Right. So doctors will place an order and patient will visit the lab get the test done, and the results also will be sent back to the HR system. Then doctor might diagnose the patient based on the results and finally conclude what is the final diagnosis that the patient has. Right. Accordingly, they will go ahead and perform the procedures or provide treatment to the patient and close it. Right. Once that is done, patient will visit back to the reception desk and will go ahead and say that I have insurance and all, so they will pay through the insurance, or if they don't, then they might pay the cash. Right. So then he leaves the hospital. This is the general workflow of the patient, very generic workflow, and this is an outpatient workflow, meaning patient is not admitted into the hospital. If patient is admitted into the hospital, then that's a different case altogether, where patients, all the data transactions will need to be captured, like when patient is taking what kind of medicine during the day, uh, what is their vitals, and all of these things. But we will stick back to the outpatient workflow for now so that it will be easier for us to understand. When you get into inpatient workflow, things become a little bit complicated. So we'll take a look at the outpatient workflow, and based on that, we will go ahead and take a look at the HL7 in the later sessions. So let's understand few aspects here. As we understood the hospital workflow, we'll go ahead and take a look at what is the challenge that we had back in 1980s, which is why HL7 has come into play. So I'll quickly give you one small metaphor to understand things better. So someone asked, will this recording be shared? Yes, it will be shared. All right. So every application that you deal with has a front end and the back end. So if you're not from development background, basically whatever application that we deal with is just the mirror for you to access the data from the backend database. Okay, though, so the actual data is stored in the database, and your application will help you to access that information. Okay, for example, your Gmail, you are accessing Gmail through your browser. Uh, so that browser is just a layer of window for you, and the actual data is residing in the Google server in a database. So that information is physically stored somewhere. In the same way, PM application, EHR application, lab application, every application has its own database, right? So why are we trying to understand this? We are trying to understand this so that we know what was the complication that was there back in 1980s. Let's take a metaphor. Let's say we have three different people from three different country, India, US, and China. If they have to communicate with each other, then they have to learn each other's regional language and then talk to the other person, or else there will be no possibility of communication. Indian has to, if he has to talk to Chinese, he has to learn Chinese language and then talk to him. Same vice versa with the US guy. If he has to talk to any one of these Indian or Chinese, then they will learn the language and then they have to talk, right? So, but there has to be a better solution, because if it is just one language, okay, let us say that he has learned it. But what if he has to communicate with other 10 countries? Will he end up in learning all the language? No, right? So that's when English has emerged as a common medium of communication between all the countries. So now all that you need to be aware of is about English. If you are aware of English, then that's more than enough. You can go ahead and communicate to anyone in the world. So there has been a standard that has been raised, that we will have one common common language as a standard, and everyone will go ahead and use that standard and learn it, so that it will become easy for us, all of us, to communicate with each other. Same logic has been applied here. When the data has to be transacted from PM database to EHR database, apparently when we say that the patient's information, demographic information, has to be sent from PM to EHR, data has to be picked up from PM system and should be sent to EHR database. That's when it will show up in the EHR application, right? So in order for this thing to happen, the engineers back then had to do a lot of work. because they have to understand the database architecture on PM side, understand the database architecture on EHR side, pull out the data, write what is the format of data that has to be transacted to the EHR system, and then understand the EHR side architecture and write it to the EHR database, right? So this involved uh, heavy work, and it used to take a lot of time, right? So if they have to interface only with one of them, one of the application, then that's fine. It is worth spending time. But the scope is so large that they may have to integrate the applications with multiple other applications. So may have to send the data not only to EHR but also to the lab. It may also have to send the data to another EHR system if they have, right? So trying to go ahead and develop interface in the same process of understanding the database architecture, coming up with the data format of how to exchange the data and all, is a very, very big task. And it's a time consuming process. If they have to develop 10 years, 10 interfaces, they have to spend 10 years. Is that a feasible solution? Absolutely no, right? So that's when HL7 has come into play as a common medium of communication between all of these systems. So what HL7 organization said is, we will have one data format, one standard format. So anyways, everyone has to exchange the data. So instead of having our own ways of or our own format of exchanging the data, we will come up with one specific format of data and everyone has to follow that format. That way, it will be easy for the sender to send the data in a specific format, and also to the receiver, because the receiver will anyways going to understand that format, right? So that format can be interpreted by the receiver and he can consume the data from that particular format. So that's how HL7 has enabled that standard, and we started using that HL7 data standard called Hl7 version 2 back in 1980s. Okay, so what is the data format and all? We'll take a look at that in the upcoming slides. But they have proposed having a common standard, which is common to all of them. All right, and that did solve a great deal of problems, like earlier when they have to integrate PM with EHR, then there needs to be a lot of discussion how you are sending data, what format you are sending data, where you are sending what kind of data and all. But with HL7 coming into play, as one set standard is defined that you will go ahead and send data in a specific format, s- the discussion that has to happen between PM and EHR side has come down, because now we know that there is a standard format that we have to follow, right? So, and everyone will be aware of it. So all that they have to do is they have to generate that standard format, and the same format can be used for anyone. No custom format required for other applications if they want to receive demographic info, right? So we are hearing this term interface a lot. So what is an interface? It's just a bridge between PM and EHR, or between any two applications apparently, which will help us to transact the data from one system to another. That's what interface is all about. And HL7 plays a major role because we are converting the data into that format, sending it through this interface to the destination system. Okay, it's very simple as a bridge or a tunnel connecting from one starting point to ending point. That is what we call as an interface. And here I have represented that it doesn't matter what database PM or EHR is residing on, because because the data transaction happens in form of HL7 V2. Okay, so uh, that's what HL7 is all about. So apparently HL7 started back in 1987 as an organization. Uh, Before we proceed, any questions so far? All right. Hl7 is an organization that is laid down in back in 1980s, and the first data standard that was released was version 1. It was used, and then we have version 2, which was released, and they have started using version 2 right from 1997 as an official version. So we'll see that version history in a bit. But apparently, this is used to go ahead and transact the data between PM system or EHR system, lab systems, any healthcare application, basically, which will help us to go ahead and share the medical data and send information to and fro between different systems. How did we end up in having this name? It is based on the open systems interconnection model. We'll talk about this particular aspect as well in a bit in the upcoming slide. Where exactly HL7 is being used, it is being used in more than 28 countries today, which includes India, Australia, USA. USA is way more ahead in terms of HL7 because they have been using it from the past 20, 30 years, whereas other countries are just uh, acquiring it now, acquiring in sense they've started using HL7 now, and we are seeing a lot of developments in terms of healthcare in many other countries too. So how did we end up in having this name? Apparently, we have something called as OSI. You can research more about OSI models in the internet. You can just Google it, what is OSI model and all. But if you're new to OSI, I'll just give you a slight introduction about it. Apparently, what I'm showing on my screen is some data, right? I am displaying a PowerPoint presentation, and you are able to see on your system. How you are able to see that? The data is being transacted from my system to your system through internet cable. That is how you are able to see that it is being sent in the form of small packets in a systematic way, right? But how my system is transacting these packets to you, OSI layer takes that responsibility. What OSI layer does is you can just assume that you are seeing your application, right? You are seeing my screen. So just assume that behind the scenes, there are 6 more layers. If your application that you're seeing is the first layer, there are 6 more layers behind it. And these layers will go ahead and consume the data that I am representing. And it will slowly go ahead and convert those data into packets. So the data that I'm displaying here is in the application layer. All throughout these layers, it will convert the data into physical packets, and this physical layer is connected to our Ethernet port. And those Ethernet ports will go ahead and send out the data packets from my system. And this will travel all through the Ethernet cable and will reach your system. And once you reach it on your physical layer of your system, they will be reverse tracked or decoded and will be displayed in your application layer. That's how we are able to share the data between different systems, right? When it comes to HL7, you are actually playing in the application layer because that's where you pull out the data, play with the data, receive it, and transact or generate HL7 messages in the application layer itself. That's the reason the name we have ended up in name having health level 7. Level 7 represents the application layer. Health represents the healthcare, obviously, right? So that's how you go ahead and have the name HL7. Then a quick overview of HL7, like any other HL7, any other language, HL7 has its own grammatical syntax. Now that being said, is HL7 a language? Absolutely no. I use the term so that we can relate it to English language and understand it better. That's the only purpose. But actually, HL7 is a data standard. Okay. HL7 has many versions. HL7 v 2.3, 2.5, 2.8. We have version 3 as well. So there are many versions of it. We'll talk about those versions in the upcoming slides. But we have 12 chapters and 5 appendices in version 2.3, which is the famous version out there and used by most of the systems. There are more than 50 message types, more than 80 data types, and more than 86 event types. This might feel little jargons for you right now because we don't know what these message types, event types are. We'll take a look at them in tomorrow's session, but these represents what is the which transaction is happening in the real-time world. That's what these message types and event types represent. So quick history about HL7. We had various versions of HL7 released in the past 30 years. Official version of HL7 version 2.3 has been released in 1997. After that, we had other versions like 2.4, 2.5, 2.7, 2.8. And finally, we had 3 as well released in the released. Uh, and But 3 was you can say that it was not very much welcomed by the industry. So people are still sticking to version 2.x. It may be 2.3 or 5 or 8 that you may be implementing, but not 3. Because of its complication, change in the message structure and all, 3 was not very much welcome. Okay, so no one is using 3 right now. Then you have a new standard which is called as FHIR. FHIR is Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. So most of them ask me whether FHIR is same like HL7 V2 or what is it and all. So HL7 is an organization who maintains the data standards for healthcare data transactions. Okay, so version 2 is what we are going to see through our training. And we have other standards that are released by Hl7 organization as well, which is CCD, Continuity of Care Document. Then you have your version 3, which is based on reference information model. And then you also have FHIR, which is the new data standard. Okay, so FHIR and HL7 V2 are totally different in terms of the format, how you use them, and all. And another question that I frequently receive is who are aware of HL7 V2 and also FHIR. Will FHIR replace HL7? The idea is that to replace HL7 down the line, but it will take a lot of time because FHIR is still a baby. There is a lot of development, lot of changes that are going through in terms of FHIR, and FHIR replacing HL7 will take very long time. So both will coexist for at least for next 7 to 8 years or 7 to 10 years for sure, because it cannot replace just like that. And there are other reasons as well, like why someone has to upgrade to FHIR. Is there any advantage? If yes, then what? How much value it is adding to the business and all. So all of those aspects will come into play if they have to upgrade. So it will take a lot of time. Next, what are the advantages of HL7? Apparently, it will help us to share the data between different systems in a standard format. We don't need any special tools. If your application can generate HL7 message, that's well. If not, just one tool, an integration tool to go ahead and extract the data from a database and deal with that. Then the code is in the ASCII format, which means you can read it. Even if you don't know the structure, if you deeply look at HL7 message, you will be able to at least figure out few of the data elements from it. It is completely operating system independent. Why? Every operating system has this OSI layer concept, and it operates in the OSI layer, 7th layer itself, right? So it doesn't matter which operating system we are dealing with, and it can connect from any system to any system. That's one more best advantage of HL7. Why do we need standards? Apparently, if everyone goes on having their own format, everyone is reinventing the wheel, right? On how certain data has to be exchanged, which is common to the entire industry. For example, if you talk about patient data, name, date of birth, gender, SSN, and address, phone number, all of these are common data elements. And if each one of us, whoever is implementing in a hospital, let's say we have 10 hospitals, 10 hospitals are implementing their own data format, then it's just that everyone is doing I mean, they are repeating the same task or same work and spending a lot of time. So there is a way of improvement in there. That is where standards are important. So if we have a standard, then people don't need to sit and rework on how or what format we have to send the data. So standards will go ahead and standardize the way you transact the information, and it will bring down the discussion, bring down the time spent on certain implementation and all. It will become much more easier, right? So if we have standards, data can be transacted immediately in real time, which will result in quick insurance payments. And interoperability is nothing but when two apps talk to each other, they are said to be interoperable with each other because they are operating or sending data between two different systems. And apparently, as we are having real-time data being transacted and accurate, we will have greater safety for patient and utmost quality in the data that we are exchanging. So let us now understand what is the base for the HL7 message to work, right? So HL7 works on this principle called as trigger event. So that's the basic um, aspect of any HL7 messaging. So what is this trigger event? So let's break that term and understand. So we have two words here. One is trigger and the other one is event. So when we look at an event, event is nothing but any action that is happening within the hospital and hospital workflow. Patient visited the hospital and he got registered himself with the hospital. That's an event. Then he had an appointment scheduled for so and so doctor. That's an event. Then he is getting his orders done. That's an event. So in this way, the entire hospital workflow or entire patient flow within the hospital is divided into chunks of events. Okay, and these are called as regular events that are happening within the hospital when the patient is going from one system to another, playing here and there to do various tasks, right? So these events, if they demand for the data to be exchanged from one system to another, such kind of events are called as trigger events. Okay, and not essential that every event has to have a demand of sending data from one system to another. Okay, but most of the events will have. So such kind of events are called as trigger events because these events are triggering the data to be sent from one system to another. Okay, for example, patient getting registered, and as soon as the patient is registered, this data, registered data, has to go to EHR so the doctor can see what is the name, what is his address, what is his phone number, where he came from, and all, right? So as this information is already being captured in the PM system, this data has to be sent to the HR system. Okay, so interfaces will go ahead and help us to go ahead and achieve that, and that is called as one event. Similarly, appointments is an event, orders is an event, results is an event, immunizations is an event. So there are many events that will be involved. Okay, so the hospital workflow that we have seen earlier has all of these various events, right? And this can be broadly categorized into registration, appointments, labs, charges, and then pharmacies and insurances. So all the first four aspects are transacted in terms of HL7 version 2, but pharmacies and insurances don't use HL7 version 2 in real time. They use different other standards, which we don't need to know right now. But we are going to take a look at HL7 V2, all the first four aspects of exchanging methodologies or exchanging data. Now let us quickly take a look at the Hl7 message structure so that we can understand how to read an Hl7 message. Okay, a small metaphor there to understand the structure better. And one quick question to everyone. So let us say that we have a situation where you go ahead and lost the power or lost the electricity at your home. So I'm talking about a situation back in 1980s or 1990s or 2000s when we don't have mobiles with us. So what is the first thing that we do?
Look for backup, like, to keep
Right.
ourselves running.
Mm-hmm.
Like it can be like a fire, or it can be like
Mm-hmm.
a battery operated, something that you said can
Right.
heat, I guess.
Right. Correct. So we look for a backup, right? So if we have to look for a backup, then even if it is dark, even if you are unable to see, still we will be able to go ahead and navigate to a place within the house where we have that backup and pick it up, right? We know that uh, we have a certain location for everything at house, everything within our home. So if we need a candle, then we go to that place and we'll pick up the candle and then we'll lit it, right? Because we know that that's the specific place for it. Similarly, we have a specific place for keys, right? So let's take another example to understand that better. Um, let's say there are two people in the house and they have a rack within their house. Everyone knows that uh, first shelf will have clothes, second shelf will have books, third shelf will also have books. And in the first shelf, they have divided into various compartments. First compartment has tees, second compartment will have trousers, and third one will have shirts. Now, whenever these two people who are at home, if they have to talk to each other, um, they are aware of this particular structure of their rack that they have. And if one of them is going out, let's say one of the guy forgot his t-shirt before leaving from home, and he calls the other person and says that, can you get me my t-shirt? The second person who is at home will go access the rack, get into the first shelf, get into the first compartment, get the t-shirt, and will go and give it to him. Now, if you exchange or if you see the dialogue between these two people, they don't actually talk about where the t-shirt is. They just say that, can you get me this? The second person will go ahead and get that for him. How? Because both of them are aware of the fact that it is present in first shelf, first rack, first shelf, first compartment of that particular rack, right? So that's how they get introduced to, uh, that's how they share that common known information, right? So HL7 also works on that very basic principle that data that we want to exchange between two different systems has a specific placeholder. Okay, what is that placeholder? How is that structure defined? We'll take a look at that. So you can compare it to very similar to what we have seen in our previous slide, Iraq. So every HL7 message is basically divided into segments. Segments can be compared to the shelf, and then segments are divided into fields. Fields are divided into components. Components are divided into subcomponents. Okay. So as you can see, each shelf can be compared to segment, and every segment has certain section of data. We'll take a look at that in the upcoming slides and understand it. Then segments are divided into fields. Fields are divided into um, fields are further divided into components. Components are again divided into subcomponents. So in today's session, we will understand at least till segments and fields so that you know how to read certain HL7 message. So before understanding the structure of HL7 message, it is important to understand um, the grammatical syntax of how do we write HL7 message or how do we read HL7 message, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So when you look at message delimiters, same like our English language, we have punctuation marks, right? We have full stop, we have comma, we have exclamation, and these are used for various purposes. Similarly, in terms of HL7, we have first one called a segment terminator, which will help us to go ahead and represent a full stop. Full stop will tell us um, that this is the end of the sentence. Say, similarly, segment terminator will tell us this is the end of one segment. We may have many segments within HL7, right? Uh, so full stop will or segment terminator will go ahead and tell it that this is the end of the segment. And usually we use something called as carriage return to represent that. Then you have field separator. So these can be compared to spaces between two words. So in order to separate two words, we have a space, right? So similar to that, we have field separator, which is pipe symbol to separate two different fields within HL7 message. So there's the same like two different compartments being separated with the help of a separator. Then you have component separator. So within fields, if we still have further classification of data, then they are separated with the help of components. And components may again have subcomponents. So components and subcomponents, we'll take a look at them with an example. But the symbols that are used to separate these data elements are caret. We call this cap that you're seeing here, this one, this is called as caret. And then you have an ampersand to separate subcomponents. You have two other representations as well, which are nothing but repetition separator and escape sequence. So repetition separator is used to represent repetitive data within a field. So we'll take a look at this as well with an example when we really come across that when we are looking at the patient structure, patient data structure. Then we'll also take a look at what is escape character. Okay, so for now, we need to understand these uh, segment terminator and field separator to read an HL7 message. So let's go ahead and pull out one sample HL7 message and read it. So this is how HL7 message looks like. The version 2 message looks like. Every message has segments is what we have seen earlier, right? So we are seeing 5 different segments here. Each segment will have a name to it. uh, in the metaphor that we have seen that one shelf, each shelf has a name. Similarly, each segment has a name. So always the segment will begin with its name, which is an acronym, usually a 3-letter acronym. Okay, and each one has their own meaning and full forms. We'll take a look at that full forms as and when we are going through the message structure. But for example, if you look at PID, PID represents patient identification. So this particular segment will have patient identification related data. Okay. And PV1 is the last segment that we are seeing here. PV1 represents patient visit information. So whatever visit related data that is there for the patient will be present in the PV1 segment. Okay. And IN1 is not present here. IN1 represents insurance data. All right. So whatever data that is captured in the front end when the patient is getting registered will reflect in the form of segments, and each segment will deal certain kind of data or certain section of data. Okay. So if you look at PID segment in depth, we'll just move it to Notepad and take a look at it. So by the way, this is not JavaScript. I set to JavaScript so that it looks better. It will help us to go ahead and have these separators in a very good highlighted way. So we just want to pull out PID segment and have a deep look at it so that we can understand the message structure. Right. So here you can see that we have pipes. whatever is held between two pipes is called as one field. Okay, and each field will have a sequence number associated with it. So this is field number 1, this is field number 2, this is field number 3, field number 4, field number 5, and so on, right? So that sequence will go on till the end of that particular segment. At the end of the segment, you will have something called as carriage return. Okay, which you may not see in real time. We'll take a look at that with an example once we look at the entire message structure. But at the end of each segment, there will be carriage return indicating that this is the end of the segment. And within the segment, you have many fields. Each field is held between two pipes, and they will have a sequence number, which we call as field position. Okay. And within those field positions, these field positions are standard, meaning they don't change. If you look at this particular Hl7 segment, this is field number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 5 has patient name. Okay. And this is a standard placeholder for patient name. So whoever is exchanging the data from one system to another, if they are sending patient information in PID segment, PID 5 will have patient name, and everyone in the world will is aware of it. So when I receive any Hl7 message, where do I look for my patient name? I will go ahead, see in PID and count the fields and take a look at that in PID 5. Right? So this is a dedicated placeholder for PID, patient name. And then you have date of birth in PID 7. And this is a dedicated placeholder for patient date of birth. So in this way, all the data elements that we really capture in the front end have specific data placeholders in the Hl7 message. That is how the data is transacted from one system to another. Okay. So we, as I said, that within fields, if we have data being classified more, then we may have components, subcomponents, and all, which we'll take a look at tomorrow. But apparently, the whole idea that I'm trying to communicate here is we have dedicated placeholders, and if you don't have certain data in one of these fields, let's say you don't have patient's date of birth, then you leave that field as blank. Just because of the fact that there is no data, you cannot move the subsequent data elements into the other data fields. Okay, if you don't have the data, just leave it blank. All right, so we'll take a look at this structure tomorrow more, but understanding the fact that there is a standard placeholder for each and every data element within the segments and fields will be there. So whenever you look at any Hl7 message, just read out the segment name. That is the first point of navigation. Reading segment name and then the field number and telling someone that this is the segment that I am referring to and this is the field that I am referring to. Okay, so we'll see more about that tomorrow on how do we read a certain segment, what is a field number, and what is segment, and what is the component that is involved in each field. Why do we need components? In what cases we divide components and all. So we'll talk about those aspects in tomorrow's session. But we'll continue through our slides. And so who can learn Hl7? So Hl7 can be learned by self-study material or seminars or trainings like this. You need to, if you want to get certified, you have to go through all the chapters, specifically chapter 2. I'll highlight this in our last sessions. It is done, HL certification is done by Hl7 organization itself. No other body is allowed to go ahead and provide certification. Exams are regularly held all over the world. Who can get trained? So we have 3 sections: basic, intermediate, and experts. So it depends on various roles. People can get trained in case if they really feel their job is demanding that. Basics can be learned by doctors as well, so that they understand that there is certain data standard and all. But intermediate and experts, people who are predominantly working in Hl7 space to generate Hl7 data messages and all, they should, I mean, it's recommended for them to get certified and trained. So to summarize what we have seen today, we have seen how Hl7 is mandatory for interoperability, how it has made it easy for apps to talk to each other and exchange data. And we have seen that all the countries, most of the countries are using Hl7 for exchanging data between different applications. And basically, it has become mandatory in healthcare space. Without that, data exchange becomes difficult. It's not that you cannot do it, you can do it, but you are reinventing the wheel by achieving or doing your own way of exchanging data between two different systems. When you have a standard, just leverage that standard and make it easier for yourself and for the rest of the people or rest of the applications who you want to interact with as well, right? So that's how entire world is moving towards HL7 in terms of healthcare data exchanges. Okay, so that concludes today's session. In tomorrow's session, we will take a look at deeper understanding of how do we read or navigate through HL7 message. What are the tools that we have out in the market, which will help us to uh, break down HL7 message and read it. And we'll also see what is field position, and we'll also talk about components. How and why do components arise, and what are the various message types and events and all. So we'll take a look at all of these aspects in tomorrow's session. Any questions from anyone?
Dixon, I have one question, Dixon.
Yes.
If SQL only,
Mm-hmm.
if I am entering wrong only, error pop-up is showing down on. In HL7, like also, if I am entering, you are told PID information 5 only, patient name,
Right.
7 only, birth,
Right.
date of
Right.
birth.
Right.
In this column, I am entering 5th only, date of birth, 7 only, patient name. Error pop-up is showing in down or directly continuing subcomponents.
That you will have to handle it in the process of generating HL7 message, or if you are receiving HL7 message, if you want to validate it, you can perform that validation on the fly in real time when in the while receiving HL7 message and interpreting the data.
Okay, Dix.
Okay, so we'll take a look at that when we are really generating or creating interfaces. We'll see how do you write those validations and all.
Okay.
But apparently, uh, if someone is sending date of birth in first name section, and if you don't write validations, for them it is first name. Okay, because that is the placeholder dedicated for first name, and they will understand it as first name only, and that's an incorrect representation.
Okay, okay, Dix.
Yep. Right. Any other questions from anyone?
Tomorrow's session, we received invite only for today. Are we going to use the same bridge tomorrow and same time, or are we going to get an invite?
Uh, it will be the same bridge tomorrow. So we'll have, it would be the same time for this week. It may change next week, which I will communicate on Friday.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Okay. I mean, timing may be shifted to 1 hour late from 7 a.m. IST to 8 a.m. IST. It may be in next week, but I'll communicate that in the Saturday morning session.
Dixon, how many days or like weeks we are planning to complete this?
So it will take 24 to 28 sessions based on how we are progressing.
Okay.
Once we get into the practical aspects of building interfaces and all, because when we start building, a lot of questions come up, so we spend ample time to answer them and understand, so that each one can benefit out of the question. So it will take 24 to 28 sessions.
Thank you. Thanks
So 4 to 5 weeks.
Got it. Yeah, sure. Thank you.
To follow up on that question, so for somebody who just want to take the basic certification, so they're familiar with the terminology and like the Hl7 framework, do we need to attend all 24 sessions, or like is there a breakdown of sessions sections good enough?
So training is divided into two sections, right? First half will be based on, or first 40% will be based on HL7. So that will be entire theoretical and functional part of message structure and functional uh, understanding of each of those messages. What are the workflows around those message types and all. So if you want to learn only HL7 and not technical aspect of how do you generate HL7, then that first part is enough. But if you want to know how data integrations work as well, then the entire training is needed.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Dixon, Daniel here. I have a question.
Hey,
So which version will we be focusing on? Is it just 2.3 or is it 2.8 as well?
so this is generic. Training is going to be generic for 2.x. We are not
Okay.
specifically looking at one version.
Okay.
So wherever needed, I'll be highlighting things about things by comparing with various versions
Hmm.
if needed.
Okay.
But we are see, when we talk about 2.x, it is just change in removal of few fields, addition of few fields, removal of components, addition of components, change in data types and all. So these things are very implementation specific. So we are not going to get such deeper at implementation level, right? But we are going to talk about generic aspects, which will cover all of these. So you will understand down the line how to deal with it once you look at the message structure.
Understand. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions from anyone?
I think we could.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Please, you can go ahead and drop. So we'll connect tomorrow and
Sure.
continue with the sessions.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone, for joining.
Thank you. Thank you so much.